Before we begin to focus in on the details, let's look back and remember how the concept of language fits into God's story. Our Creator is also the creator of language, and his authority and power over that fundamental area of human existence were clearly demonstrated in a dramatic event in the history of the world. Remember God's account of a time more than 3 generations after the Great Flood, when a civilization had settled in the plain of Babylonia. This was in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 to 4. These people's great-grandparents had been eyewitnesses of the global destruction of the flood and had been in the boat that God had used to preserve them and the animals. But already they had moved far away from an appropriate appreciation of him as creator. They had given up coming to him in the way he had graciously given to humans after the fall, in faith with the sacrifice of animals. They were arrogantly telling their own story, and in their blind ambition made a concerted effort to build a great tower for all to see. It was to reach to the sky, a monument to them, a means of physical protection and a way of preserving their reputation for generations to come. The name of the tower, of course, is Babel. God was unwilling to let them gather their strength and resources together in a concerted denial of their need for him, their creator. This is looking down to verses 5 to 9. He graciously gave them the opportunity to see their foolishness and did something to the post-flood civilization that made it impossible for them to tell their story to each other as a homogeneous group. His narrative simply says that he confused their languages, and that this had the effect of scattering them over the world. By doing this, God effectively stopped their rebellious intentions and also forced the fulfillment of his original intention for man, which was to populate the earth. God used something he'd gifted man with in the first place, but which was now taken for granted: speech, the ability to communicate tangible facts, as well as ideas and abstract concepts. As we look into the fascinating area of language throughout the next tutorials, in its wonderful complexity and intricacy, we can also acknowledge God's amazing creative power as we investigate this gift he gave to man. We can remember that it makes sense, knowing the origin of all the world's languages, that they are amazingly complex in structure and exhibit an incredible variety, but also share many similar characteristics in spite of their variety, which point to their common origin. In this tutorial, we will be introducing some of the basic concepts in the area of linguistics, and in later tutorials, we'll be going on to look at some of those concepts in more detail. We aren't setting out to study linguistics for its own sake, but because gaining a foundational understanding of how language works will help us to eventually become better communicators in a new context and in another language. So what is linguistics? Linguistics is the scientific study of language. It is about trying to explain the properties of language, not individual languages, but of language in general. Linguistics seeks to answer such questions as: what is language? How does language work? What special properties does language have? How is language structured? How do children acquire their native language? And how do people use language? So what is language? All humans are born with an innate capacity for language. We were created that way. Language is something we do with our minds. It is a set of principles and building blocks that we have stored in our minds. Language isn't writing and it isn't speech. Not all human vocal sounds are language, and not all languages use sounds. Sign languages are real languages too. So what is language? We can understand more clearly what language is by thinking about symbols and signs. A sign is something that stands for or refers to something else. Some signs have a real relationship with the thing that they refer to. They are iconic. They are not the thing, but they are an attempt to actually represent the thing. A symbol is arbitrary. There is no relationship at all between the symbol and the thing it refers to, except that we agree that it will refer to that thing. Look at the picture of the policeman with his stop sign. The picture of the policeman is an iconic sign. It's not actually a policeman, it's just pixels on your screen or ink on your paper, but it is an attempt to represent a policeman. The red shape he is holding up is a symbol. It means stop. But there is nothing about that red shape that really represents the act of stopping. We just agree that this is what that particular geometric shape with a red colour means. It's the same in language. The group of sounds we write as shoes has no real relationship with the thing that we put on our feet. It's just a group of sounds we make with our mouths. But as speakers of English, we all agree to use that group of sounds to refer to the things we wear on our feet. Language is a system of symbols. The relationship between meaning and linguistic form, the words used to convey meaning, is arbitrary, just like the red stop sign. The meaning of each symbol is a convention or agreement between speakers. We all agree that the group of sounds we write as cat refers to the small furry animal. We could all agree that cat means something else instead, and that a different group of sounds means the furry animal, but we would all have to agree. This symbolic representation of meaning is a characteristic of language, not just of English, but of any language. Almost all words and all grammatical structures in all languages are arbitrary symbols that convey meaning. There are a few examples of iconic signs in languages also. They attempt to represent the real thing, but these are the exception. Languages can have words that use onomatopoeia or sound symbolism, for example in English, bang, murmur, mumble and mutter, where the actual words sound like the thing they are representing. Or languages can use features like lengthening or repetition in an iconic way. I waited for a long time, or it happened many, many, many times. But although true signs like these do occur in languages, they are a very insignificant part of any language. Almost all words and almost all grammatical structures in any language are not iconic, but instead are arbitrary symbols. This is a defining characteristic of language. So, language is simply a system of symbols that represent different meanings. But it is an incredibly complex system of symbols that is only manageable because rules govern its use. In most languages, the rule systems themselves are so complex they are still not properly understood. Native speakers learn and use those rules because God gave them an inherent ability to learn and use language, not because they investigated and memorized the rules of their language. When we say rules in linguistics, we don't mean something we are told to do, like don't split infinitives or don't end a sentence in a preposition. We really mean principles that we have stored in our minds about how to use this system of symbols. Knowledge of these rule systems is unconscious. We are not aware of it and don't have to think about it. As native speakers of our language, we have this unconscious knowledge or linguistic competence, an underlying knowledge of the language that gives us the ability to produce it. Our actual use of language, what comes out of our mouths, often contains many and various mistakes. Stammers, slips of the tongue, and false starts when we lose our train of thought and have to start a sentence over again. These don't reflect our actual knowledge of the language. They reflect the influence of outside factors such as sleepiness, drink, distractions, memory lapses, and so on. But it is the underlying knowledge of language that we are interested in. The native speaker's working knowledge of the system of rules that give him the ability to produce the right symbol at the right time to communicate clearly. All languages use the same kinds of building blocks, such as words, and all languages organise these building blocks into grammatical structures that help listeners to understand the meaning. These grammatical structures are built up according to very strict rules. One of the most important universal properties of language is that it is creative. This means that a native speaker of a language can construct and understand novel utterances, utterances they've never encountered or produced before. All languages are finite systems. there is a limited set of rules in any language. But every language allows for the production of an infinite set of utterances. There are an unlimited number of different sentences that you can make using those rules. As long as you know the rules of a language, you can create new grammatical sentences in that language. This is called rule-governed creativity. So, I can say, John walked home. John walked home and Bill caught the bus. John walked home and Bill caught the bus and Fred took a taxi, etc. Or I could say, John is tired. You know that John is tired. Tom said that you know that John is tired. I think Tom said that you know that John is tired, and so on and so on. I could keep adding on bits to these sentences because there's nothing in the grammatical system that stops me from creating an infinitely long sentence. The limit is only to do with the processing power of my brain. The important point is that there is no longest sentence in English or in any language. Given any sentence, however long, I can make it longer by adding and or did you know that? It's impossible to make a list of all the sentences of English or of any other language. In our minds, we have a lexicon of our language. This is a kind of word dictionary. You can't construct a sentence dictionary like a word dictionary because there's not a finite set of sentences. This is true of all languages because all languages allow for the production of complex sentence patterns. So, language is characterised by rule-governed creativity. Your knowledge of the rules of a language, your linguistic competence, makes it possible for you to produce an unlimited number of new grammatical sentences in that language. Just like a chef who, with their knowledge of the rules of how the different ingredients go together and how they should be cooked, can creatively come up with an incredible number of possible dishes. Okay, so what is grammar? Grammar is the unconscious knowledge of the rules of the language. What we referred to earlier as linguistic competence is actually grammar, how the mind processes and stores language. But the word grammar is also used to refer to our representations of that unconscious knowledge of the rules, a human attempt to try to simplify and describe an incredibly complex thing that God created. So, there are different kinds of grammars that you may hear about. Prescriptive grammar, pedagogical, that is teaching grammar, descriptive grammar, generative grammar, universal grammar. All these are just representations or ways to talk about and describe the rules, not actually the rules being manifested in real life. Grammar is how the mind processes and stores language. Grammar is also a representation of how the mind processes and stores language. So, grammar is a set of mental principles or rules, and also a description of those rules. Within the bigger set of rules we call grammar, there are different areas that use different kinds of rules, depending on the basic building blocks used to build different kinds of bigger structures. These are called domains or levels of grammar. Phonetics is speech sounds. Phonology is the organisation of sounds. Morphology is the structure of words. Syntax is the structure of sentences. And semantics is meaning, the meaning of words and sentences. We will look at each of these domains in more detail throughout this module.